Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing yet another book review. This one is of This Is Not a Ghost Story by Andrea Portes, I think is how you pronounce her name. And I'm just gonna start this by saying that I'm hoping to do my book reviews a little bit differently, and I wanna give a shout out to Reedsy. It's R-E-E-D-S-Y. That channel posts a lot of cool things about if you're a writer or if you're a booktuber or if you're writing reviews, like that kind of thing, and just gives pointers on how to make them better for everyone. I started to realize when I was editing that I felt like my reviews were too long or kind of drawn out, and I thought it might be boring for people to hear literally everything that happens in the book. A good example of that would be Dorothy Must Die. There's definitely details in there I did not need to put in, but I get really passionate about books and I like to talk about everything that happened in them. And maybe it isn't boring for people that don't know the whole story, but if you do know the whole story and you're watching it through, it does get kind of repetitive. So I watched a Reedsy video on hopefully how to improve these reviews. And I always say this, but leave me a comment down below if there's things that you would like me to change or things you'd like me to add. I want to make these more enjoyable for you guys to watch. I'm trying to do more feeling driven rather than plot driven. And hopefully that'll stop me from also looking down at my phone, which is where my notes are. Okay. At the same time, if you feel like I left something out, or if you have any questions of the plot, feel free to leave me a comment down below, or you can send me a message on the Instagram page with it. So you can leave me a message on the Instagram page with it, which is storeys_books. Same as the YouTube channel is called. So let's get into the actual book review now that I've kind of summed that up. A quick plot about this book is that it's the main character, Daffodil, and she is starting a summer job where she's looking after a mansion for a very wealthy family, and it's basically in the middle of nowhere. Strange things start happening, and so then she's trying to put the pieces together of what's actually going on, and there's a couple places where she thinks that she's hallucinating things and maybe none of this is real, but then there's some physical things that start to happen that she thinks, okay, maybe it is real. Another thing that I'm adding to these reviews is the genre category. So I would call this a thriller mystery, except I have a couple problems with calling it a mystery, which I will get to. I do try to look on Goodreads as well to make sure that I'm not like skewing what I think it should be, so it obviously was also listed under YA as one of the main categories. The main conflict that happened in this book was that Daffodil started having strange things happen to her and happen in the house and around her, and she's not really sure what's going on. She's also finding a lot of strange objects around the house, and she's trying to get a hold of people to figure out what's going on, like her family. She wants some of them to come visit with her and she can't get a hold of them, like that kind of thing. The characters, really, the only one worth noting is Daffodil, the main character, because again, she's in this mansion in the middle of nowhere by herself, and she's pretty much the only character in this book. There's like a few other ones that pop in, but they're not even close to as important. A lot of what I rated this book on was also based on the character herself. I didn't give this book a great rating, but we'll get to that. I didn't like her a whole lot, and I also, in trying to do these new reviews, watched a couple other reviews on this book, and I found that most people did agree with me on that because I wasn't sure. I was gonna include it, but I wasn't sure how to express it and if it was even correct. So I was glad that other people agreed with me. She tried so hard to be quirky, and the writing style I didn't enjoy because it was like she was talking to herself. It'd be like, okay, now calm down, Daffodil, like what are we gonna do? Or it would be, and Janelle's laughing. Yeah, or it would be things like, now reader, you may be wondering. Like things like that, but it wasn't supposed to be in a diary format. So I don't know, I just found it very strange to read, and it usually sucked me out of the story. And there was creepy scenes in this, I did enjoy that, but the writing style really made me not enjoy it as much and just kind of distracted me from the plot line. This book took me a long time to read as well, even though it is a shorter book. So as I mentioned, something that I loved was the creepy aspects of this book.
Such a ghost story.
The book was definitely creepy. It had me shocked at some points, like literally mouth open shocked. But my favorite part of things like that is I like when they're creepy, but I more so like when things are put together and everything's explained, similar to And the Trees Crept In by Don Curtikish, which I talk about all the time, or The Haunting of Hill House / Bly Manor. There's a lot of weird and creepy things that happen that you're like, okay, WTF is that? But then at the end, it's like everything is explained, and it makes it all creepier for me personally, because everything makes sense rather than just being weird. Whereas that's the main thing I didn't like about this book, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about, what I didn't like. I have in my notes segue. Certain details were never explained at all, and by certain details I mean the majority of the book. It seemed like the scenes were just there to be creepy and not really add anything to the story. Like an example is there's also construction workers doing work on the back of this house during the summer, and that's part of her job, is she's supposed to be monitoring them and like making sure that everything goes fine. And when one of them shows up, they point out, like a few weeks into her being there, that there's like a weird charm thing hanging over the door. And it's like an omen thing, it's supposed to keep bad spirits out, but she's like, I've never noticed that before. And I think there's even like bells on it, like it was something that she was like, I totally should have known that was there. And she starts looking and they're all over the house and she had never noticed them before. And then like a few days later, they're gone. And like that's never explained. It's never explained what those were, it's never explained why they disappeared, like anything like that. So I don't know, I just found things like that strange. One thing is, when I was looking up things to include in reviews, is whether or not this was well edited. It's a very well edited book. There wasn't a whole lot of details that didn't need to be there, except for literally the whole book that was never explained. There wasn't really any grammatical errors that I noticed, which you know, if you notice a grammatical error, like it's so annoying because it, again, just takes you out of the story. The end was not satisfying for me, which, like I mentioned, because that's my favorite part, is seeing how everything comes together. And then it was something that I kind of called from the beginning, and I wish that I hadn't have, but they made it a little bit obvious. Something else is they really tried to make this like a romance book. Even though she was alone in the house, it was like flashing back to before she moved, because you hear that like the reason she moved is something happened and she needs a new fresh start. So then she's explaining what happened and keeps going back. And it was just really cheesy romance in my opinion, which I don't enjoy personally. The other thing that a lot of people had a problem with, myself included, was that the book basically starts with her joking about wanting to commit suicide, and that happens multiple times throughout the book and then is never brought up again. Same as there's a couple lines where it talks about, oh, and I grew up really poor, and there's a paragraph where it explains how poor they were, but then that has nothing to do with the story. Like at all. There's like one paragraph on it in the whole book, so I don't understand things like that. I feel like she's just trying to be relatable or trying to be different, like things like that I just don't really understand why they were added. So an example of the writing style that I didn't enjoy was she says, daffodil, that's me. Ironic, isn't it? Sunny yellow daffodil, as full of promise as a spring day, and yet I'm waiting in dread. And that was like the first page, and that just, it made me uncomfortable. Just stuff like that, but it wasn't supposed to be a diary. So I don't understand why it was written that way. I'm not sure, and it doesn't continue like that through the whole book. There's just certain sections that end up like that, and then other ones are different. I also want to say this is not supposed to be disrespectful to the author at all, because that was a big thing that I saw a lot of people doing in trying to learn how to make different reviews. Is I understand how much, well, I don't really understand, I've never done it, but I expect it takes a long time to write a book, and there's a lot that goes into it. These are just things that I personally had an issue with, and I would just like to let my audience know, in case they want to read it, that these are the things that you're in for. I feel bad, I don't want to be harsh. Another problem is that I had really high hopes for this book. The way that it's described, the cover, I loved it. I totally thought it'd be something I was interested in. I remember it was one of the ones that I saw on Goodreads that I was like, oh, I need that when it comes out. And I went to the bookstore and I got it, and I was so excited to have found it. And it was like, people say, oh, if you like American Horror Story, and if you like Danielle Vega, which I have a video coming out on her stuff, it's probably out by now, go check that out. And if you like There's Someone in Your House by Stephanie Perkins, which I love that book. There was 3 things that it was described as, and it was the first time ever that I saw that I knew what all of them were, and I really liked all of them. And I was like, whoa, this is gonna be great. These are all the things I like in one book. And then it was just not very good. And I was very upset. I did actually rate this book 2 out of 5 stars. It's the lowest rating I've ever given a book I wasn't forced to read for school. And even some of those were rated higher. I had originally rated this 3 out of 5, but I find that I often rate books higher than what I'm feeling just because I don't want to be rude. But I did actually go back and change it because the longer that I thought about this book and the more that I thought about how much I honestly kind of regretted even reading it, I knew this is ranked too high. This book would be good for you if you want more of trippier horror rather than creepy. Like I said, where she thinks she's hallucinating sometimes, and I don't want to spoil anything, but like something happens and then she thinks that she imagined it, like that kind of thing. It's more like mind-bending than it is actually creepy with a story. Personally, I do not recommend this book. I'm sure you can guess that by now. Yes, it did have creepy sections, but I was kind of cranky at the end by how it went because I was really excited for it and I was extremely disappointed with how it ended. And the way that I described it in my notes was kind of like a haunted house with projectors, where when you're walking through a haunted house, there's some of them that have stories, but like one of the ones on PEI, as far as I know, it's just like, oh, this creepy thing happens and this creepy thing happens, and some of it can be like a witch and some of it can be like a ghost, and none of it really comes together and none of it makes any sense, but it does scare you. That's kind of how I would describe this book. There are creepy things in it, but it's just not really ever explained, or none of the things are connected. As I mentioned earlier, similar books would be And the Trees Crept In by Dawn Kurtikich, just because there was creepy scenes. There's like confusing details that change around. However, I rated her book 5 out of 5. And again, I have a review on that, so you guys can go check that out if you're interested in this kind of thing, but better. I think that that's all for my non-spoiler section. I don't have a whole lot more to say on this book. I'm not even really going to describe the plot a whole lot, A, because I'm trying not to do that anymore, and B, just because it didn't make any sense at all. So if you're looking for what this story is actually like and specific things that happen throughout, I would look for a summary or someone else's review, whereas I'm going to point out the things that stuck with me. And if you guys think that you want to read this, I'd be interested. Let me know down below if you've read it before, if you're planning on reading it, and what your thoughts are on it. And for those of you that just want to know what happened, skip next.
Spoilers.
The plot of this book is basically that Daffodil was dead. That's another reason that I said it's similar to And the Trees Crept In. The main girl was like in purgatory. She had already passed away and she was just reliving everything. Except that this girl was, from what I understand, she was never actually in this mansion house, so I don't understand where it like came from in her mind and why she ended up there. Basically, it's flashing back and forth to her boyfriend, and that's the thing, is she's like, oh, I don't want to think about this thing that happened, but I'll think about the good stuff. And so then she's talking about her boyfriend and like meeting him, and they were together and whatever, and then she's gonna go away for university, and they go to a party, and he's so upset that he's gonna leave her. All of a sudden, throughout the whole book, he was a super nice guy, and then he thinks that it's so unfair that she's moving away and she's leaving him here, and she gets in the car with him and he's drunk. It says earlier on that he passes away, basically, like when they got into the accident, and talks about her getting out of the car and then like the car explodes or something. But then you find out after that her getting out of the car was actually like her ghost getting out of the car, like she wasn't actually alive. The other thing is she like praised him this whole book and said what a great guy he was and all this stuff, even though he was so abusive, and it so obviously shows that when you see how he treats her. Like, he didn't care enough about either of them to not drive drunk, and like he knew he was drunk. She said it multiple times. She also got in the car. There's so many issues with what happened, but my main thing is that I feel like this is dangerous for younger girls to read because they think that this is an okay behavior to have, considering that when she looks back on him, she's like, oh, and he was so perfect, and it's like, no. He might have seemed that way at first, but the way that he treated her was totally unacceptable. Basically, the very end of this book, I am gonna jump back a little bit and explain some other things that happened, but the very end of this book, she sees him again, and she's like walking on university, and so at first you think she got out of this random haunted house because it's like later on kind of thing. You think, oh, she actually did get out of the house and blah, 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 but that was really weird what happened back there. And then you find out that this university is basically her like moving on from life. And so then she sees him there and he's like, oh, I was just waiting for you this whole time. Like you were stuck in your own like mind, again, similar to And the Trees Crept In. And I have just a random house. Like she was just stuck in this random house. Did this have anything to do with her life? Did she ever stay there? I don't understand. Is it where all the spirits go? Like it makes no sense at all. Obviously there's a lot of things that go on at this house that are weird, but like there's construction work all day, every day that she's there. And occasionally she starts going out through the book and she says like it looks exactly the same. Like she can hear them sawing, she can hear them hammering, but like nothing new has been done that day. And that happens like a couple times. She also finds like a jar that has hair and blood and all these things in it that would be like a witch's spell in the cabinet. And she drops it on the floor and it smashes everywhere, which stupid. I don't really know how that stuff works, but I know that something like that, you probably don't want to break it open. But it's things like that, and it's things like the things over the door that I was like, okay, this might actually be okay. I know I don't love the writing style, but this is creepy. But then it's like, that didn't mean anything. Like none of that added back to anything. So that's basically all I have to say about the storyline. I just want to say some things that I didn't like at the end. The reason that I say I don't enjoy calling this a mystery genre is because nothing was explained, as I mentioned. So it's not really mystery. It's a mystery in the way of like, oh, that's weird, but then it's never explained. So I don't consider it a mystery myself. It's much more a thriller, except that thrillers usually have great explanations. So I'm not really sure. I just don't like calling this a mystery because in all the Nancy Drew I read growing up, she figured it out at the end. So I don't know. There was also a large part of the book was about a dead frog in a jar. She notices right when she goes in, and you know, like, okay, that's gonna be a big thing. And then at one point, but halfway through the book, she looks and like the frog's gone, but the jar's top is still on it. So like she's kind of freaking out, like, okay, am I losing it? And then she's been walking around the house like a couple weeks, and then she finds the frog on the floor. Like it's not in the jar anymore, it's just on the floor. It was like she didn't know what to do with it. She's freaking out and she kind of like closed her eyes. When she looked back, it was gone and it was back in the jar. Like stuff like that, that's creepy, but it's never explained. It doesn't, how did the frog get out? I'm so frustrated. The biggest thing that I didn't like is the description on the book is so misleading. It doesn't make any sense at all. Because it says the house has a long ago grudge it needs to settle. Daffodil is the key to settling it. But the house has no grudge. The house has no meaning. She's just dead. I was thinking there's gonna be some sort of curse on the house, and so the house is trying to kill her because it's killed other people, and then she figures out a way to break the curse. Like that was what I pictured when I read that. I felt that it was kind of obvious that she was dead, because there was a couple times that she left the house in the book and she'd go in public and she'd be saying that she's got such bad social anxiety, but like thank God no one was looking at her, and it seemed like no one even noticed her. And like she opened the door like into a coffee shop and went in, and then everybody looked at the door but they weren't looking at her, but everybody was basically like, why did the door just open by itself? Like just stuff like that I was like, okay, so she's probably dead, but I didn't understand how that connected to the house, and fun fact, it just basically didn't. The way that the book ended, like before her realizing that she was actually just dead, was that the construction guy, at first you think that he was like possessed by the previous owners of the house, because it says in the prologue of the book, it's almost like a newspaper article thing. It's just talking about, it says Scarlet Mills Gazette in 1865, and it's talking about the man and his wife, which is the man that she went to the house, like to look after the house or whatever. That was the man that she met, and it shows he died in 1865, so obviously he was a ghost, which I kind of figured, because it's like, oh yeah, we're going to this random island for 2 months, but can you watch and make sure that the construction's fine and look after our house? Like, a very strange story. But it's talking about how they died in a fire. And then all of a sudden the construction guy seems like he's possessed, and he's like trying to get Daffodil to eat dinner with him, but then also the house like catches on fire, and I think Daffodil had set it on fire. And you never really find out like what happened. All of a sudden it's just like, oh, she's walking on campus, and you're like, oh, so she made it. And then it's like, ha, she died. And I'm like, oh, she died in the fire. And then it's like, no, she died in the car accident. And then I was like, then what was the point of the fire at the house? Just, it was like 2 different stories in one. And I think that both of them could have been interesting on their own, but together they didn't really make any sense. My final thoughts about this is that the whole book was kind of like a fever dream. But like I mentioned, I also had really high hopes, so it could be on me for the low rating. Maybe I should have gone in with lower hopes. It definitely had potential. It could have been really good, but unless I missed a chapter or I blacked out, or even then there was so much that was left that I feel like there's no way that I blacked out and missed all of it or skipped a chapter accidentally because I've never done that in my life and I've read a lot of books. I want to say again, no disrespect to the author because it was very creepy and there was great descriptions in it. I just think that the storytelling needs a little bit more work. But the character was very descriptive, I will say. Another thing I wanted to mention specifically to you is that throughout the whole thing it's talking about how she really likes watching ancient aliens on like streaming services. She likes watching like historical things about aliens and how the pyramids were built. But that means nothing to the story, but they bring it up like 8 times. Like it's like the most prominent detail about this main character other than her boyfriend that it just doesn't, I don't understand why. I just don't get it. But that's what I'm trying to say is that the character was very descriptive and the scenes were really good. They just didn't make any sense all put together. So yeah, that's my review for This Is Not a Ghost Story by Andrea Portes Ports. I am really hoping this is not offensive in any way. I'm not trying to be rude. I just had some struggles while I was reading this book. I've also heard that this author has a lot of books that are very critically acclaimed. Like she has great books. This is just the only one of hers that I've read and I didn't enjoy it, so maybe this just isn't one of her bests. I'm not sure. That's all I have to say about this. She's the author of Anatomy of a Misfit, if you recognize her name. I think that that's all for this review. Let me know down below if you've heard of this book or if you've read it and what your thoughts were on it as well. And yeah, I will see you guys next time. Bye guys. Completely demolished this book. Words. Under didn't like, I like listed things that didn't like and it's so Oh, bookmark. Yeah, no, okay. There was like a prologue here and I was like, oh, maybe that has to do with the ending and maybe that'll make it make sense. Nope. Would just like to, like, what? Stomach is growling, it's fine. It's so sad. Anyways, I'm so disappointed.